You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. All right, Nick Cavanaugh, the man, the myth, the legend, the founder, CEO of Sensible Weather. Welcome to Slick Talk. How are we doing today?
Doing great. How are you?
Oh, living the dream. I think we're both having a similar morning, a little chaotic, but hey, we're here. We made it.
That's right. These things happen.
Hey, but once we get into the conversation, you'll find out that it's going to be a sensible reason for your life. So it's going to be money. For all the listeners, that was a bad pun / dad joke. Should definitely not ever do that. I'm not a dad yet, so I haven't earned that right. But anyways, Nick, super excited to have you on. I know I kind of got the fanboy with you pre-recording and our pre-chat talking about how we covered Sensible and your guys' fundraise back in, I don't know, that was maybe sometime late 2023, correct? Halfway through
There's
the
been a
year?
couple of them, possibly, I guess it was May 22 or September 23.
23. That was the one.
23.
So yes, got to cover that with our Good Morning Hospitality crew. But for the listeners on Slick Talk, let's give them a backstory. Give us a high level overview of Sensible Weather, who you are, what you're doing, and then we'll jump in.
Sure. So Sensible Weather is a climate data and FinTech company. We offer a product called Weather Guarantee, which appeals to travelers, outdoor event goers, people going to theme parks, ski resorts, other ticketed attractions. Essentially, our product looks a lot like travel insurance, but everything is automatic, and we pay you back day of when the weather ruins the thing that you're trying to do. We try to make it as seamless as possible in order to enhance the experience, turn your day around.
I love it. And you have an extensive background. I loved on one podcast that you were discussing on, you kind of lived in the intersection or the road intersection of where like data, weather, and finance and investment kind of like intersected. And that obviously wasn't enough for you because you had to go build a solution to solve this problem of shitty weather ruins trips, ruins activities, whatever it may be. And yet you don't get any type of like money back at all. You just kind of have to be out the thousands or hundreds of dollars that you spent. So you created Sensible Weather. I'm curious, why build something instead of just like, I have a hard time with founders in the sense of like, what was the moment to push you over the edge to get you to say, I'm crazy enough to go build this thing myself?
So yeah, I mean, I am definitely a data and finance nerd, climate data in particular. But before that, regular data, probabilist, math guy. Generally, my entire life, sort of where I gravitate to. Spent a first part of my career as an academic, as a climate scientist, doing research. Second part of my career was in finance at hedge funds, running weather and climate data and figuring out how it applied to commodities markets, which again is basically a lot of data analytics, a lot of flowing a lot of data, figuring out what it means, and ultimately with a goal of either transacting some product. Within finance, it's generally risk mitigants for trading futures markets, which essentially allow a utility or a farmer or whatever to hedge risk. So as part of those markets, you essentially need to understand the probabilities of various things happening, so you know what to expect in a certain trade. The intersection of weather data and climate data and finance, that's one application. There are many applications. Historically, in insurance, generally speaking, weather data interacts with certainly consumer markets, car insurance, home insurance. If there's a fire, if it hails and it damages your roof or it damages your windshield, that's one type of weather or climate risk that you as a consumer maybe have experience with all the time. More specific to weather risk and weather risk impacting things, agriculture and energy, two big markets for that, where products like the Weather Guarantee under very different names have been around for decades, essentially meant to, if you're a farmer growing tomatoes and it freezes or it hails and your crop is ruined, you want to get a reimbursement for that. So this concept, this intersection of weather data and finance has always been fascinating to me. And for the longest time, there really hasn't been a market for consumers. Like there's been no way for consumers to access products like this, particularly in hospitality, where travel insurance or ticket insurance is all over the place. It explicitly doesn't cover weather. A lot of times, people when they go buy a travel insurance policy, they think it does. And when their trip is ruined, they go to file a claim and they find out that you're not covered. So that was essentially the crux of the problem that I set out to solve. I'm a very avid skier, and the whole thing started with, wouldn't it be neat if you could build analytics and products around skiing to, on the sort of forecasting side, be how do I take the best trip? How do I know best place to go, best time of year? How do I utilize forecasts? I want Bluebird, I want Powder, whatever it is. And the second part of that was, oh, if you're running all these odds to make the forecasts, you could build a product that just reimburses people when they don't get what they want. Again, this was all constrained to skiing. So then I had this idea when I was, my last fund. I was hired at the fund space, and I was ready to do something new. And I was at the time of my life when I was enthusiastic to really get out and build something. I didn't know where I was going to build it, what it was going to be, but I wanted to start from scratch. I wanted to do something new. I wanted to carve out my own thing. So yeah, I crashed into this skiing idea, and it's like, okay, how big of a market is skiing? Travel skiing, destination skiing. Skiing is like roughly $50 billion a year market. I'm like, okay, that's pretty big. And then it was like, well, the same product, the same data infrastructure, financial analytics can really be applied to anything within travel. How big is the rest of the market? How big is the market for going on a beach vacation? How big is the market for going to Disneyland? How big is the market for tennis tournaments? Whatever it is. I started adding these things up, and I'm just like, wow, that's gigantic, and learned pretty quick. Hospitality is one of the biggest economies in the world. Moreover, this day and age, so much of it is booked online, which gives you the opportunity to put products in front of consumers in this very automated way. So essentially, the distribution problem is solved for travel and hospitality at large. What's left to do is build the product that nobody had built before. There's a bunch of reasons why nobody had really built it before, but towards the end of the aughts in 2017, 18, 19, when I was thinking about this, a lot of the pieces were sort of coming together to be like, you could build this product. You could A big challenge in getting the product out to market is you have to flow a lot of data. It's a very data intensive product. So you need to have the data infrastructure available to do this at scale very, very fast in order to embed in checkout flow, say with an OTA like Expedia or with a major hotel group or Disneyland or whatever. So that was the thing. It was like you have this massive hospitality market that is increasingly online. You have this intersection of data, the core data availability, as well as the data architecture to house that data and service it and crunch the numbers very quickly. Where these three things came together, like, wow, there's a massive opportunity here. I'm going to focus on that.
What's up, Slick Talkers? Sorry to interrupt the episode, but I want to give a quick shout out to our partners at Minute because, unlike Sensible Weather, they are a product that you do touch, see, and feel from hardware to software. Recently, we had Nils, who is one of the co founders of Minute, on the show, and we talked about that beautiful relationship that tech founders find with a hardware to software product. Now, if you're a host, if you're a property manager, or if you're a hotelier, this is a great product that you also need to think about in partnership with your entire tech stack because you can now detect cigarette smoke, other types of smoke, and products that happen inside of your hotel, your home, etc. And of course, they're going to be able to really be a partner. They're going to educate you. They're going to be a way to help cut costs and to cover any staff shortages. This is a great product for multiple reasons, and they help drive revenue. So if you go back to that episode, go tune in and hear how Minute brings revenue to the table and doesn't just cost you money as a vendor, they actually make you money. So check it out. There's a special offer for our Slick Talk listeners down in the link in my show notes here. So you're going to get 2 months free. And if you have over 10 homes or 10 doors, then reach out directly. Let them know that Will Slickers from Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, sent you, and they'll take great care of you. So without further ado, Thanks for tuning into the episode. Sorry for the interruption, but get with Minute. I love him, and you'll love him too. I love it, and there's many other topics and questions I kind of want to pick and pull from that, but some of them I already out have on my outline here, so I won't jump the gun. But I'm curious throughout my research and throughout like listening to you other shows, have you started anything like this before? Have you started anything before ever? Is this your first venture as a startup founder?
So this is my first venture as a startup founder. I will say, I think so. I've been asked this question about entrepreneurship before, and while this is my first venture, my first VC-backed startup, both I like to think of my life in like three career installments. The first is an academic, the second in hedge funds, and the third is sensible. Each of these things, what they have in common, and they're actually very entrepreneurial pursuits, they have different objectives. So, as a researcher, as a scientist, in order, the prerequisite to get a PhD is you have to do something entirely new. So, you have to be out there asking questions and answering those questions that no one has asked or answered before. And you get to this point when you're a researcher, working towards your PhD or postdoc doing research, where in the beginning you're taking a lot of classes, you're learning a lot of things, and you're starting to ask questions and learning how to answer them, the ins and outs of how to be a good scientist. Eventually you get to a point where you're asking questions that nobody knows the answer to. That's the point where you're like, okay, this is fundamentally new, and I have to go out and solve this problem. Similarly, in hedge fund lands, hedge funds are massively meritocratic. So it's all about using your brains and your wits to build something that is new, that is different, because these markets are very competitive. So if you're not doing something that's new and that's different, that means everybody else is doing it. It means you have no edge. It means you're not making any money. So both my prior careers, while very different, essentially the goal is doing something entirely new and pushing it out there with some end goal. As an academic, it's getting a PhD, it's publishing a paper, it's a completely different value system. In hedge fund land, it's ultimately making money for the fund, making money for yourself. Within sensible land, startup land, it's all startups are all about going out, asking a question that nobody has asked before, and trying to figure out how to solve that question, build a solution that is scalable. And in the case of sensible, we focus on consumers. It's building something that answers that question for hundreds of thousands, millions of people over and over and over and over again. So well, I think it's a long-winded way of saying, well, I've never started a company before. It feels very familiar, and it always has.
I love that, and it's funny because like as you're describing all of this, I'm like, it makes total sense. The trajectory, the thread that weaves the two together to create sensible. I'm curious because like I realized in my startup, career, I would say as a founder, I find myself asking more questions than giving answers. I've always actually felt that with my whole life, from being the seventh child with all of my sisters and my mom and my dad and my brother, and like always asking questions. I was always a kid, like, why? How come? Why? Why? Why do we have to do this? Probably pretty annoying, but I always end up asking more questions than I do give answers. Do you feel like that's a true statement for yourself, or do you find from your research, PhD days that you actually asked all the questions that you really need to, now you're able to provide more answers?
I think asking questions is one of the rarest skills. Some people probably start with it, intrinsic curiosity. I think part of it is confidence, being able to go into a conversation with somebody that might know the answer, and admitting that you don't, and asking a question around it. Questions make the world go round. That's where new things come from. If you're afraid to ask questions, if you can't articulate something you're confused about or something you'd like to know, then you don't move forward. So I think questions are huge. I mean, short anecdote, my PhD advisor would go into to conference talks, generally with all around the world, with experts and whatever was being discussed. And my PhD advisor may not have been an expert in that subject. Sure enough, he definitely was zero shame in asking questions. And at the end of the conference, there's always time for Q&A. And you would ask these questions that on the surface seem asinine, seem so simple, and everybody in the audience would kind of scoff and snicker or whatever. And like 9 times out of 10, the person presenting couldn't answer the question. So like, I think that goes to show you, it's just like, not even just answering questions or asking the simple questions, getting down to the fundamentals and being like, how does this work? Can you explain it to me? More often than not, they're good questions and you shouldn't be ashamed to ask questions.
As a podcast host who's been doing this for a while, I find that the simpler questions that I ask, the better the answer in the conversation I have. I used to sit down before an interview and think, I need to ask the most thought provoking, intellectual, mind blowing questions there are. And then realizing my episodes performed better or worse. I didn't enjoy it. My guests definitely didn't enjoy it. They were confused most of the time because I couldn't articulate it. And yeah, it just never worked out and it was kind of always like one of these things that you see on other shows, right? But as you're kind of talking, I'm curious, you said this feels very familiar, right? Like, from PhD to hedge funds to sensible, first time startup founder, at least VC backed, but felt familiar throughout the whole journey that you've had. How do you like it so far?
I love it. I feel like I was made to do this. I came from a background that wasn't particularly privileged, but I've learned over time that I am a risk taker. I think I've learned from mentors, from bosses, whatever. The risk taking risk is where the interesting things happen. That's where the opportunity lies. And just over time, I've gravitated toward that. I've always been a physical risk taker, which is interesting. Kind of an extreme sports guy, skier, snowboarder, surfer. I like to go, drive across the country, get lost in the woods, whatever. And then at some point, that predisposition to risk taking transcended into my personal life, my financial life, what I wanted to do with my time. I think time is our most valuable resource, and ultimately, how I think about risk taking now, it's all about time. And time is finite, and there's an opportunity cost to doing something or to not doing something. And ultimately, the biggest risks you take are with your time. So I've grown very accustomed to thinking about everything as risk reward, thinking about everything probabilistically, just really wrapping my head around the risk of any given situation, any given venture, any given idea. And so it seems very natural. And it's kind of, I think that this is a culmination of, you know, 30 plus years at the intersection of physical and financial risk, I guess.
Well, I was just gonna ask is if you weren't much of a risk taker, didn't have the privilege to take risks growing up, I definitely didn't grow up very, very comfortable. We were taken care of and my parents did an amazing job raising us, but it wasn't like we were, out to eat every night or, all these other things. It was definitely, it's mac and
Yes,
cheese and hot dogs and, all the all the fun stuff.
very, very similar upbringing, it sounds like. I mean, if there's one thing, it's hard to say like what you would have done different in order to make different choices, go in a different direction. Learning to take risks sooner. I can't say how I would have done it faster, but if somehow I could do it again, I would learn to take risks sooner.
I love that. And would that be more or less physical risk and more risk and emotion and curiosity? What would that risk be?
Yeah, I mean, always being a physical risk taker, I guess I'm more talking about, emotional, financial risks with your time, going out there and doing things that are not perceived by most of the world as safe. I think it's just it's become a massive asset, thinking solidly about risk taking.
Can I ask you, what did your closest friends and family, and I know you have a wife and a daughter, but what did they think when you were going to launch Sensible after having this career, especially in hedge funds? Like, I can only assume you're probably making some decent money. So to leave that to go start
Uh,
something.
yeah. So I left my last fund at the end of 2018. It was a month before my wedding, and decided I was going to do it while my wife was on her bachelorette party in Tulum. And I went to pick her up from JFK, which anybody from New York, nobody goes to pick anybody up from JFK. But I went to pick her up on Monday morning. And she's like, "So what's up?" And I'm like, "I want to quit my job and I want to do it today." She's like, "Oh, Okay.
It's like,
but
this is what
that's
happened while I was gone. Great.
that said, I mean, fast forward 5, 6 years, back then, didn't have kids, didn't have a house, didn't have responsibility, wasn't married, had some money in the bank. It was a good time to take risks. You fast forward, and now I have two kids and a wife, and certainly now it's like there's definitely like these things kind of catch up to you. But yeah, at the time it was a no brainer. I was unhappy. I was ready to do something new. I also wanted to move back to California. I wanted to get out of New York. I was getting married. It seemed like closing the last chapter and opening up the new one.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, 2018, 2019 was a great time, I think, for a lot of it. I left in 2019, right on the tail end, but it's a great time to leave, and I think a great economic time, at least it was. And now, Nick, I'm very curious because I'm not the biggest data guy. I've had a lot of data people on the show, from Jamie Lane, who's the senior vice president, but also chief economist at AirDNA, which is a great friend of the show, and have many people kind of blow my mind with data and numbers and things that I just, again, I can't geek out as much as I would like to. Now, for the listeners, I'm very curious. People sometimes can be skeptical, and what I've learned from data companies or people that provide such an intense set of data is that most of the time when people are confused by the accuracy, it's usually on the user. No offense to any listeners. Usually it's your problem of like not understanding or interpreting the data better. But as a data person, how do you guys battle, or not even battle, but message and appropriately deliver the data that a lot of people just can't understand? And how do you determine that accuracy to make sure that your travelers, because you are a B2C company, that they feel like they really are getting the best deal because the data was actually accurate?
So I'm going to give two answers that go together, but the second one is kind of a unique spin. The first answer, when we started this company, I was actually like right before COVID. So there's no one to sell to. So we did a lot of consumer and product research while people were stuck in their houses, dreaming about going on vacation. And we talked to lots of people. And we were very intentional about how we built the products, how the coverage worked. One example of that is we learned early on that, specific to data and rain, even more specifically, nobody understands intensity. So accumulation, it rained an inch in a day. Nobody understands what that means. But they do understand it rained for 3 hours this morning. So this idea of time versus intensity, it's a good example of like a lesson learned about how we build our product and message it to consumers, which we learned by talking to people. And so, that's one thing. And it's like we talked to a lot of people, tried to figure out what they wanted first. Then, in actually building the product, our default is to be as clear as possible in the messaging. So try to be, as unambiguous as we can, particularly when the product is presented to a customer. We try to make it super, super clear. So that's the first part. The second part, which may be a bit controversial, is actually related to customer service. We have learned, and we actually set up our product as a feedback loop. So when people have questions, when they have concerns, if it didn't work the way that they were expecting, we encourage them to contact us and tell us, because that's part of the feedback loop. If they don't come back to us and say, this is what I was expecting, this is what I got, there's no way we would know. So while I think a lot of startups and a lot of companies view customer service as a cost center, a frictional point, we see it as an opportunity, particularly for consumer products. You have to learn through feedback. And so, we have open ears, and we're always keen to hear how consumers experience the product, good or bad, so that we can continue to improve it over time.
Well, instead of it being a cost center, it becomes kind of a research and development center, right? Like
Absolutely.
it and it's free because like they kind of pay for the product, and then they bring the feedback, and it's like, okay, like we didn't have to really pay for this. So it's smart. It's really smart. Man, there's so many questions I have. I want to go down this route. I grew up in the generation that every morning before school, I had to watch the weatherman to determine, am I bringing a raincoat? Am I wearing my boots? Am I not? Like, am I going to be too hot? Am I going to be too cold? That was pre-iPhone, pre-weather app, all this other stuff. And let's be honest, the weatherman always got made fun of, or woman, because of their inaccuracy, right? Like it's like, okay, it's going to rain today or it's going to be sunshine. And then boom, it dumps on you at school while you're at recess and you're upset because your mom didn't pack you the right stuff. How has that changed over time? Like, was the weatherman or weatherwoman like always wrong and just didn't understand? Or like, what's improved to make sure that accuracy is actually delivered? Because as a consumer, I would love this for my life, as we've talked pre-interview. So how do I know that like this is really for sure?
So that the answer to that question is enormously complex and it's improved. Man, we could start. So start at the very beginning. I'll try and like kind of dumb this down like lay
Yeah, yeah.
terms. Weather forecasts start with observations. Where those observations come from, earliest forms of observations, thermometer, rain bucket, that type of thing. The natural end of that type of observation is a weather station. Oftentimes they're at airports. Airports have the highest quality observation stations because they're very well monitored because it matters for taking off and landing planes. Over time, a type of observation called remote sensing, which on the ground sensing with a thermometer is different than remote sensing. And remote sensing is this day and age primarily radar and satellites. So the idea is, can you take technology that measures certain things? Indirectly, those things are proxies for weather. And that could be infrared radiation from space, for example. It can be a proxy for convection, it can be a proxy for rain. You can do radar bounces off of rain and snow. So you essentially get noise in radar. That can be inverted as a proxy for precipitation. What that allows you to do, instead of having observations at one point, an airport, it allows you to have observations everywhere at once. So that was a huge improvement. Since you and I both were kids, that type of weather monitoring has really exploded, and now it's everywhere. Transmitting data in real time all over the place. So that's the observation end of it. Second part is the computing end of it. Weather forecasts take all this information, whether it's from ground truth station observations at airports, radar, satellite, snow cover, whatever it is, massive amount of data, and they shove it into a system that interpolates it all. And that's called an initial condition. So that's where the weather forecast starts. And over time, the process of taking all these disparate observations, which have grown, in magnitude and in scale, the amount of data, taking it all in and synthesizing it is a very hard problem in science, which there's been a lot of improvement on. And then finally, taking those initial conditions and propagating them forward. That's a weather forecast. Historically, that's been done on supercomputers. Supercomputers have gotten a lot more powerful over the last couple of decades. The algorithms that propagate these things forward have gotten more and more complex. So the models have gotten a lot more complicated. The data going into them has gotten more complicated and bigger. So over time, the forecasts have improved. There's still room to go. These forecasts continue to improve as there's more and more and more and more and more. This day and age, day of forecasts are pretty accurate, particularly things like rain, temperature, snow. They do a pretty good job. 2 decades ago, they really didn't. So the weatherman was basically looking at forecasts and being like, okay, I see that model. I know it's wrong. It tends to be wrong in certain ways. I'm going to correct it in my head. Over time, the models are now correcting it for the meteorologist. There's still a role for the meteorologist to apply their particular know-how for their lake snow effect or mountain snow or whatever it is. But the models themselves, as a data project, have gotten so much better. And the next frontier is this AI stuff, and we'll see where all that goes. Very early days, but all of it just continues to improve the same way any type of data-driven science improves.
There's so much that, again, like I said, I don't I don't understand a lot of that stuff, which I'm happy to admit, but it does sound like obviously the PhD has worked off. And so I'm curious when I went through a lot of your guys' capital raise and kind of like followed the investors that were behind you. Is it hard explaining that stuff to investors? Like, are they on the same level, or do you have to kind of break it down and kind of go to school with everything to get everyone on board financially behind the mission of Sensible?
On the weather side, not so much. I think that Yeah, I mean, an interesting, like, if I were a three-time founder, venture tech founder, whatever, with no weather experience, I think it would be very hard to convince somebody that I knew what I was talking about, at least on the weather side of the world. That said, I had two prior careers. First actually doing the science with accolades and accreditations and research papers, whatever. So that's sort of a rubber stamp. And then the second part is like, okay, I use that information and traded around vast sums of money, put a lot of money behind the analytics that I was producing. And so, you know, venture investors or whatever investors are like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It's like, you've got the science thing and somebody else trusted you with a lot of money. That part's good. On the financial stuff, the fintech stuff that we do, a lot of investors, particularly our fintech investors, are very knowledgeable in the space. That part I've had to get up to speed on. Some investors do dive deep into that, the insurance investors, fintech investors, but yeah, not so much on the leather stuff. Who knows? That might be changing. It's now like a hot topic, so I don't know.
No, I'm very curious. Like I've told you, I'm a bootstrap founder. I don't have anyone on my cap table, and I don't have anything to explain to anybody. It's just my team. So it's like, okay, like cool, whatever.
Uh,
People trust me.
proof is in the pudding. You've been
Yeah,
doing it.
exactly.
Track record is the most valuable.
Exactly, but it makes sense because your track record does explain, at least to the investor side of outside of the fintech and the insurance piece. So that does make sense. So that's a great answer to the question. All right, Slick Talkers. Now more on the products that you don't see and feel, right? Like, Nick is talking about this throughout the episode, especially a direct to consumer or a B2C company where you have to go through a back door to get to your consumers. It's a consumer facing product. Well, our partners at Hostfully and Hudson Creative Studio are a B2B product that you do get to touch and feel in the sense of software and a beautifully built booking engine. So, on Hostfully first, Hostfully is a property management platform, not a property management system. They're a platform that allows you to upload your home and details and information from all the things that you need to do on Airbnb, Vrbo, and many other OTAs that they have partnered with and integrated in their marketplace. On top of that, your calendars are synced, your tech stack is synced. Their marketplace is truly incredible as we're partners with Minute and many other tech providers in the industry. For my management company, Recreation Rentals, you can have direct access to their marketplace within Hostfully. Great team, great founders, David Jacoby, Margot Schmorak, and of course, many others on the team that all make the product and the company possible at Hostfully. They're amazing. We love working with them, and you will too. And on to Hudson Creative Studio. Hudson Creative Studio built our Book Direct site for recreation rentals, and it's beautiful. It's amazing. And our guests that book directly with us have a seamless experience because they built their own Book Direct engine or booking engine that allows the experience to be seamless and less clunky and integrated within the Book Direct website. So I know I've said Book Direct a ton of times in this whole ad read and sentence, but basically, as you're growing your brand, you need to grow with Hostfully and Hudson Creative Studio behind you. Great teams, great product, great podcasts. That's how we like to roll. So grab the link in my show notes. You're going to get special offers from Hostfully and a special referral from Hudson Creative Studio to get everything built out for yourself and your brand and company. So without further ado, we're back to the episode. Check them out and we'll see you soon. A quick question before I actually go into the one that I wanted to queue up for you. Where did sensible come from for the name? Is there any tie or meaning behind the name, or it was just a really good marketing name to use?
So yes, so sensible weather is actually a term in meteorology. What it means, sensible, is like yes, that makes sense. That's kind of our take on it. But what sensible also means is you can sense it. So so-called sensible weather variables are types of weather like temperature, air temperature at the surface, rain accumulation, wind speed. These are things that humans sense. They can feel it. It impacts their day. So my entire research was, as an academic, was focused on so-called sensible weather variables, because I was like, these are the things that actually matter. I don't necessarily care about pressure, you know, 5 miles up in the atmosphere. That may be a very good variable to benchmark your model prediction on, but that doesn't mean doesn't mean anything to you and me. So that's where the term sensible weather actually came from.
I'm glad I asked because I was expecting like, oh yeah, it was we trialed it with a trial group or whatever. What do you call those? get a room full of people, the random
Focus
strangers you have
focus
in.
groups,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, get one of the focus groups going. No, so that's a great answer. I love that the name was in front of you the whole time, throughout your whole career. It was calling you to create it. So it's pretty cool. All right. So you have mentioned a couple times that you are a customer focused or customer facing product. I do know that when obviously as a traveler, if I book on Expedia or whatever OTA or even direct, that there is a back end business, right? You have to integrate with that booking platform or the PMS, whatever it may be. My question to you is if I'm a traveler or let's say a golfer or just Colorado, we have 300 days of sun, but who knows, one day we might get a nice fat snowstorm randomly and it ruins my plans, but I wasn't planning on traveling. I didn't book a hotel or a short-term rental. Literally just was going to go about my day. Is Sensible a product that regular customers can use without having to travel, a short-term rental, a hotel, etc., in order to actually get the perk of Sensible, if that makes sense?
Not today. So we do not have a direct to consumer arm. You can't go to sensibleweather.com and buy a weather guarantee. You could. That was actually a strategic business choice. Going B2B2C through our merchant partners, through the marketplaces, through the platforms is a distribution model. It's basically when you startup land, selling stuff, you pick your distribution model. I think with travel, the amount of online distribution that is available. Right? It's difficult to go sign B2B partnerships with these distribution companies, ultimately integrate with them in order to sell to their consumers. That is hard. But the prize at the end of the day is you get distribution for free. Whereas going direct to consumer, it's very hard to acquire customers. So, from the beginning, I wanted to start B2B2C embedded fintech products. We also see time and time again that consumers, when they're in the purchasing mindset, they want to do it all at once. So selling a product, building a product that is contextual to the thing that they're already buying at the moment that they're buying it, is the best way to sell the product.
No, it's great. I'm trying to become more of a or I yeah, I'm trying to become less of a consumer in a lot of my daily life. I catch myself being easily sold to, especially as I listen to other podcasts and other things like that. So darn you, this week in startups and a bunch of other shows I listen to. But it is a good point. I think like when I am buying either a trip, I'm usually thinking about the travel gear and my suitcase and oh man, it's got a loose wheel and it's getting a little annoying. Maybe I just buy a new one, right? Like I already spent $500 on the flight. Let's just buy another $500 of suitcase and travel stuff that I don't really need. But it just justifies the spend, right?
When
So
you rip that band-aid off, you
yeah,
only have to do it once.
yeah. Or it's like when I go to Lululemon, I buy one pair of joggers and then immediately I got three ABC pants that I'm trying on in the fitting room and just immediately trying to get my credit card too. So, anyways, shout out to those companies for taking all my money. But I'm curious, one thing I was thinking about, and it's very interesting because I don't know how this would affect Sensible or even if it would have any effect at all. But you know how in Dubai they've created basically their own rain. They have the ability to turn on clouds and have all this science and tech make it rain because it's dry and it's a desert basically. How or would that impact Sensible at all? Do you guys have customers that are going to Dubai and then like, hey, even though they're telling us it's gonna rain at 1:30 because they're gonna make it rain, does that have anything to do with Sensible, or would that be covered?
It hypothetically, it could have something to do with us. So geoengineering and all of the ways that we can manipulate weather, it's not very widespread. There are instances, Dubai, China, so-called cloud seeding, basically makes clouds, makes it rain. Outside of the US, it's around. It's not very common. Inside of the US, you do see some cloud seeding at ski resorts. What they do is essentially, instead of making clouds from nothing, they're enhancing a storm. When the conditions are right, they can make it snow more, which is good for their snowpack, so on and so forth. If those things, at scale were to proliferate and everybody is doing geoengineering all the time, great question if we have a business. Does it matter if, it's like we can guarantee the weather financially, but we can also guarantee it physically? Good question. I think we're pretty far away from that. But yeah, who knows? 100 years from now, maybe this sensible, the weather guarantee doesn't exist because you can just hit the weather that you want all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I was gonna say, we did talk about like the subscription, right? Where you just put Sensible onto my credit card. This was pre-chat, so for all the listeners, we kind of geeked out about this before hitting record. But basically, put Sensible on my credit card, and anything I do or buy or have in my life, it just is covered, right? Like Sensible is able to protect me, Will Slickers, as an individual rather than a traveler or golfer or whatever vertical we want to go into. So let me know when that's ready because I will sign up today. Like I have my credit card ready. It's paid off, ready for Sensible to start dinging. But I'm curious because we also talked about the tech that you don't see. And operators today, especially on the short-term rental side, I think we're inundated with technology from PMSs to locks to noise sensors to dynamic pricing to operation software. I can keep going, and the list is endless. There's actually a couple charts out in the industry that showcase the amount of insane amount of categories that there is for technology and the amount of companies that are in each category. So there's a lot to choose from. We're inundated with tech and we have to use it. And our job as an operator, whether you're turning over a home or a hotel, it's intense. You have a lot of people and variables that make it unpredictable as you'd like, even though I know a bunch of housekeeping managers and operation directors that are probably going to disagree with me, but there are so many variables that can change and will ripple effect and throughout your whole day. So when it comes to the tech side of Sensible on the product, you don't see it. I'm not an operator that's logging into a dashboard or making sure to do all these things with Sensible. You basically have technology that I don't see or touch. Talk to me about that and how kind of maybe that was the approach that you guys went with in the beginning and why you think it's probably benefiting you guys today.
Yeah, so there's a couple of layers of tech that you don't see at Sensible. The very bottom layer that sort of powers everything, makes it all work, is our data platform, which is a lot of weather and climate data. So this is historical data going back decades all over the world, real-time observations, including the satellite and radar that I talked about previously, as well as forecasts, which look forward. Um, in aggregate, this is hundreds of terabytes of data that sits in the cloud. Hundreds of terabytes of data is impossible to process all at once, particularly when you need consumer speed and scale. So the first part of the technology was building the data architecture in the cloud that could, one, store all that information, two, parse it, tear through it, analyze it very, very fast and at sort of consumer speeds in order to put forth a product at scale. Truly the core of the business is understanding weather and climate risk. In order to do that, you need to process a lot of weather data. So that was the start, and that's I've been doing this stuff for decades, and that's where it's like the first challenge is like you need to do this, prove that it is scalable, and you can do it very fast. If you can't, you can't do a consumer product. Full stop. So I had to start there. On top of that, you can call it we call it protect internally, but it's our policy management system, sort of an orchestration layer. So when a consumer goes to whatever hotel you're buying.com and gets to the point, I'm booking, Friday and Saturday in a couple of weeks or whatever, in order to put forth the weather guarantee offer, we tear apart all of our climate data and figure out risks and put forth the coverage. If you opt into that, that gets booked into our policy orchestration layer, which includes all of the contact information, exactly what you're covered for, the location, the date, payout methods. If you have them, if you bought a Sensible product before, we have that logged, so you don't have to enter your credentials again. The day of, all of our payments are automated. So we're essentially looking at, who do we owe what today. Text messages are automated, emails are automated. So all of it is this massive system. It's this big machine that crunches numbers. First, the weather and climate data. Second, this policy management data. And then the final bit is the FinTech pipes, payments, pay-ins and payouts is incredibly complicated. And so we also have a massive amount of payments orchestration so that when you, the consumer, get the text message from us that says we owe you money, you click the button, you're like, I want to get my money somehow, whether it's PayPal or bank details or whatever, all of that stuff is orchestrated as well. So money is withdrawn from our account and pushed into yours. All of this is the tech that you don't see. And what tech is, the miracle of tech, it allows you, the goal, I think, for all tech companies is to build something that works like magic. that like there is, zero touch, everything's immediate. That's our goal, and sort of like the drive and ethos is like, how seamless can we make this? And the seamlessness is not by accident. It's like an enormous amount of stuff that you have to build to make it work that way.
Yeah, it sounds like a kind of a chaotic mess behind the scenes, right? Like it's the perfect house, the clean house that you walk into of your friend that has like that one closet. You're like, just don't go in that closet.
I
It's
know. I think it's a beautiful Scandinavian mansion, modern, clean
there we go.
lines. Everything is perfect, well architected. That's what it looks like behind the scenes.
Ah, I love that. I love this. Way better the description than mine. Way better. I'm also again, I'm not a data guy. I've never built tech. So like the behind all that, like the fintech side especially, payments in and out daily, like that for me already sounds because I work, I've invested in a couple like payment products and a couple other, industry things, but at the end of the day, it's stuff that I'm not capable of running or building. So definitely.
We have an internal running joke when we go down these rabbit holes of pay ins and payouts, and particularly when you look at things like taxes and VAT, which vary by location. And eventually we go down these rabbit holes, then all of a sudden somebody will just go, FinTech. It's just like,
Fintech.
yes, here we are.
I love it. I love it. Well, Nick, we're at that point of the episode where I told you I had 2 questions queued up for you that I wanted to save towards the end. So this is your moment. This is it. The anticipation that you've been waiting for. So
The tough
one
ones.
the tough ones. In about an hour or 2, I'm gonna sit down with Alice, who is on the product team of Sensible, and we're gonna have a product roundtable with the, chief product and technology officer of Muse. Her and Yosef are gonna sit down and we're gonna discuss building product. I'm gonna get very well educated on building product, and it's gonna be great. But what's one thing that I should ask Alice on the roundtable for the listeners to enjoy her answer and respond to, when it comes out?
Well, that's a good question. Alice specifically, so she's background back end software engineer, big data, box, a lot of B2B type stuff. She's dove into B2C world, had no experience in weather. She has a lot now. I think a great question for Alice in terms of, for your listeners, in terms of, if somebody is interested in how all this stuff works or is thinking about being a CTO, starting their own company, that transition from working as a software engineer for somebody else as a small part of a big system, to taking the captain's wheel and building it for yourself, particularly for consumer products, which, while they say the goal, sort of the seamlessness that I alluded to before, the goal is to make it very simple for consumers. The simpler it is for consumers, the more complex it is to build. So I think that would be a great question for Alice, how she's wrapped her head around that.
Perfect. I just wrote that down and definitely going to hit her with that curveball because they did get an outline before this round table, but that was not on there. So I'm going to insert at the moment I feel right, but it's going to be good to see her react to that. Now, my last question. I told you we pinged our listeners on Instagram, and I actually DM'd a few loyalists on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, I'm interviewing the founder of Sensible Weather. What's a question that you want to ask if I were able to pick one?" And I did pick one. The question is, you have a B2C model. What about a B2B model? Let's say I'm a hotel in Aspen, Colorado, and I have a bad snow season and lose a ton of revenue that I would normally make the year before or in years prior. What was sensible, or would sensible ever cover stuff like that from a B2B point of view?
Who asked you this question? I'm going to need their contact details.
I will
Um,
slide you their information at the end of the episode.
that is the plan. Actually, in some ways, I think it's the way that I see in hospitality weather risk. I wanted to start with consumers because the problem is most acute for the consumer. The consumer is planning a trip for a year. They've outlaid thousands of dollars. They've been looking forward to it for 6 months. There are no second chances. That is the ultimate pain point for a consumer when the weather ruins the thing that they had been looking forward to. I thought that was a phenomenal opportunity to build a product around, to build a brand around. basically knew that a certain, some amount of consumers would buy it. It wouldn't apply to everyone and to everything, but to the people that really mattered, where their experience really mattered, you could build a product that very acutely solves a problem at scale. The second part of that equation is where this B2B thing comes from. Say we put a weather guarantee out, say it's a ski resort, hopefully this person's ski resort, and 20% of their consumers buy a weather guarantee. The weather guarantee does not require the consumer to cancel. We are reimbursing the consumer. The consumer paid their money to the ski resorts to get their weekend's worth of tickets. That means the ski resort takes that 20% of their customers' revenue and shoves it in their pocket, regardless what happens. There's the 80% of customers that don't buy it. What do we do for them? So this is where this B2B thing comes in. To me, these are two sides of the same coin within hospitality. One way of smoothing out revenues for businesses is weather guarantees for consumers. The benefit is you're also making, helping your consumer have a better time. But yes, we can also build a very similar product day by day for the ski resort, for the hotel, whatever, to reimburse things like reduced demand and near-term bookings due to bad weather, as well as cancellations. So yeah, there's natural fluctuations in revenue when consumers say, the 80% of the consumers that didn't buy the weather guarantee say, I can cancel within 5 days. I'm just going to cancel. That's a revenue hole for the ski resort or for the hotel. We can build similar products for ski resorts and the hotels. And these things together, to me, this is a comprehensive resilience solution for hospitality. Financial resilience solution to hospitality. Obviously, except for the geoengineering, we can't stop the weather from happening, but we can mitigate the financial impact across the board. And that is the goal of Sensible.
So well said, and I love it. I love the vision, and it's not just a short-term solution for the consumer, but it does cover multiple facets of the industry, not just of hospitality. But I can see this, going into many other categories and verticals. So I selfishly never book the like travel insurance whenever I book a flight. I think I'm like, no, it's because it's not covered by weather, so why do I care, right? Like if it's whatever else that's stopping me. But would you guys ever get into airline stuff, or is that kind of like another mixed bag of a lot of things to solve, and maybe, who knows, chaotic software and technology already, or archaic legacy software on the back end?
So airlines sort of two embedded in there, sort of two things. We could offer weather guarantees to people booking airfare. The reason we haven't is we need to know exactly where you're going. So that, a plane ticket tells you what airport you're going to. That's not good enough. We need to know what hotel you're staying. We could ask where they're going, but it's a point of friction. So we haven't gone there. The other parts of the world is some B2B, maybe B2C, airline delays, flight cancellations, stuff like that. That is something that we could do. We haven't looked to do that. But yeah, as everybody knows, flights get impacted by weather all the time. And that would be another use case for the analytics and the platform that we've built.
Yeah, love it. I just selfishly wanted to ask that one. That wasn't even on the line. It was just like, might as well ask him. I'm booking a ton of flights these days. So that was a lot of fun, Nick. I love these types of conversations. And I think you're the type of founder, and Sensible's the type of company that I don't get to like engage with often. There's not many of you guys out there in the sense of the tech behind the scenes that you don't see, the data and weather and like all these other things that we've discussed. So want to say thank you for being on the show. Appreciate a ton just for the candidness that you've had, and transparency of sharing kind of the product and the roadmap and lessons learned along the way, especially from pre-founder days. But as always, all of our listeners know I love to ask, what's one link you would love to have in the show notes, even though we're going to put them all. What's one link that you would love to have to push listeners to if they want to learn more, if they want to reach out, anything like that?
Check out sensibleweather.com. You can see a list of our current partners. Feel free to book at any one of them and buy a weather guarantee when you do. You can also follow along in our blog and our news stories. I'm out doing as many of these things as I can. I love to have these conversations, whether it's about Sensible or generally. I think that this is a fascinating topic, and it's my entire life. So there's that.
I love it. It's all Every founder, this is all I do. I live and breathe this. I love it. Well, thank you so much again, Nick. And as always, for all of our slick talkers out there, you know exactly what to do. Give Sensible some love, like, follow, subscribe, all the things. Make sure to reach out to them and let them know that Will obviously sent you from Slick Talk. And as always, we'll see you guys again next week. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our show partners for making Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, possible. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we would love to connect with you outside of the podcast. So you can follow us on all of our social media channels for daily hospitality content, or find us on slicktalkthepodcast.com. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and we will see you guys all again next week.